So hit it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to This is the Place Sports, the podcast. I'm your host, Austin Facer, along with my co-host and my father, Dirk Facer. How you doing, Dad?
I'm doing well. The old man is doing well. We're excited with our guests this week. We have John Coon, sportswriter and author of Alien People, and I told him he could hold up his book cover.
There we go.
Look at that. Where can people buy that?
That's typography there.
They can buy it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Kobo, Google, Apple, Books A Million. Everywhere books are sold, you can find Alien People.
All right. And we're also pleased to have a good friend of mine, a former Ute great, Steve Tate, pride of the Skyline Eagles. Welcome.
Thanks, Dirk. It's good to be on. Yeah, that's right. I'm the pride of the Skyline Eagles, although, some are bitter because I'm now watching my son play at Olympus. So
I know. Isn't that I won't ask what you do with the rock if you get a hold of it. Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you guys. Well, if you're new to the This is the Place Sports podcast, we break it into 4 quarters of 4 minutes apiece. And the first thing we're going to talk about, let's start with quarter one, Oz. Let's talk about the national championship game. I saw the ratings were among the poorest in history, and it probably had a lot to do with the fact that it wasn't a very competitive game.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama beat Ohio State 52-24, led by their triple threat quarterback Mac Jones, running back Najee Harris, I think, and then wide receiver Devontae Jones. What were your guys' takeaways from the game that you saw? Is it fair to say that Alabama was the runaway champion this year?
No question. Alabama was dominant with every team they faced this year. What you saw in the championship game was pretty much textbook Crimson Tide football for 2020. And the thing that really stuck out to me was Devontae Smith and just what a Heisman Trophy worthy performance he had. Basically only played a full half, but he had 215 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns on 12 catches. I mean, that's about as perfect of a performance as you could ask for in that situation.
Well, Steve, you're one of the best defensive backs I ever watched play the game. Tell me what it's like to have a receiver like that. He's obviously a handful.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama, we've always seen such a powerful running game with them. And this year, you combine it with a passing game. It's tough to defend. And Clemson's no slouch. Clemson is a team that's got all the loaded weapons. But this year, Alabama proved to be a notch above every team they faced. You're starting to kind of see a separation between Clemson, Ohio State, and kind of those three. I thought it was going to be Clemson leading up to it, and then Ohio State ends up beating them to get to the championship game. But it's interesting. With everything coming back the prior year, I thought it was Clemson's to lose, but now Alabama is on a different level, and it's kind of been those 3 teams the last few years, and there's really that 4th team is kind of a step behind, pretty big step behind.
Steve, does it take away from college football a little bit to have a dominant team like that, or 2 or 3 dominant teams? I mean, is it disheartening to everybody else, or not really?
I think it is. I mean, I think that's why the viewership was down this year. Especially there's really no reason. I mean, everyone's sitting home watching football. There's really no other reason other than the fact that I think people thought Alabama was a shoo-in to blow away this championship game. I mean, I think everyone probably anticipated the Clemson rematch, but Ohio State ended up pulling that one out. And from that point, I don't think Ohio State matched up as well, perhaps, as we've seen Clemson in years past.
John, what do you think? Does this secure Saban's legacy as the greatest college football coach of all time?
No question. I mean, people actually, look back at like Bear Bryant as the standard of college football coaches for all the success he had at Bama. But I'd argue that Saban's done a lot more with what he has than what Bryant did with what he has.
Although Bear Bryant had Forrest Gump. We should
Yeah, he
remember
did
that.
have
Yeah.
Forrest Gump.
Yes. Well, and the thing is Saban's doing this in an era where there's tons more talent across the board in college football. There's fewer scholarships to go around than during Bear Bryant's time. And you have a lot of programs there. They're top flight, elite programs, and Alabama's making them look silly. I mean, they're not dropping games to lesser competition for the most part. When they do lose a game, that team usually ends up having a special season themselves.
Steve, you've been in the locker room, obviously, some guys that played in the NFL, went on to play in the NFL and that. What would it be like to have like 9 or 10 guys in there that were going to the NFL? I mean, it's a whole, an all-star game, isn't it?
It's amazing. I mean, they've got a plethora of fantasy football players in that locker room. I mean, it seems like every year when you're picking a running back in your fantasy football league, seems like somehow they're tied to Alabama football. That's what's been amazing is that Nick Saban, you know, I actually played against him my freshman year when I was at Utah State and he was coaching at LSU. But what's amazing about that is Nick Saban's been able to do it for, you know, we're talking now, you know, 20 plus years. He's been able to stay competitive in an evolving recruiting world. You know, he's had to adapt and change his ways because, you know, let's be honest, recruits and style of play and personalities have changed over the years.
Oh, and he has a big red X on his back, obviously, too, every year, and that's something to be said about that.
That buzzer means we're going to move on to our next topic. Something we talked about this week on our website, theplaysports.com, was in our Facer to Facer section. We talked about what changes, if any, need to be made to the college football playoff. I recommended a 6-team field, whereas Pops here recommended an 8-team field. I was wondering what you guys think needs to change in the college football playoff, if anything, to make it more interesting and maybe see some more parity.
I look at the field at 4, and the main issue we're running into that we see from year to year, and probably lends to the lower ratings that we saw this year, is that it's literally the same 3, sometimes same 4 teams every single year. And expanding the playoff will allow more teams who are deserving to at least get a shot to go to that title game and have a shot to play for that national championship. I think at a minimum you need to have automatic bids for all the P5 conference champions. And then, I mean, if you expand an 8-team playoff, then you can take maybe the top G5 team. This year would have been Coastal Carolina or Cincinnati, and then have a couple at-large teams, you know, maybe from like the SEC or wherever else where the runner-up team has been really high quality throughout the year. And I think it'll lend a little more interest, a little more drama into the proceedings, and it'll also be more manageable. I mean, we're not talking like, hey, let's do a 24-team playoff, let's do a 32-team playoff. That kind of gets diluted, but you put the top 8 teams in there, and I think fans will respond well, and I think it'll create a lot of interest, and you may have that Cinderella, maybe they have that number 8 team that can go through and make a run one year, or have that number 7 team come through and make a run. It'll be fun and exciting. I mean, that's what we love about March Madness, right, is seeing those underdogs make that run.
Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at this bowl season, you know, there's really a few games, in my opinion, 2 games that really stick out to me that even were worth watching. Was, you know, I was glued to the TV when Liberty was playing Coastal Carolina. I mean, that was the game of the bowl season for me, watching those 2 go at it back and forth. I think more you know, eyes were glued to that game probably than any other game. I haven't looked at statistics, but certainly looking at the Twitter sphere, everyone was glued to that Liberty Coastal Carolina game. And then aside from that, Cincinnati, you know, watching Cincinnati go at it with Georgia. I mean, people crave, if you go back and you look at historic games over the years, it's very rarely it's the championship game. You know, that championship game is almost watered down to the point where we almost know who's going to win. Now, there was the exception, you know, when Clemson pulled off the upset with Alabama, but I think as sports fans, we crave we crave an underdog story. I mean, we love the Boise States going out and beating Oklahoma. We love, Utah going and beating Alabama. We love Cincinnati going and beating Georgia. I mean, that's what sports fans crave. And with the current playoff system, it does nothing for us. All it does is it's really, I don't think we've taken a step much further than where we were during the BCS era, to be honest. It's almost 4 teams that were projected to get there are going to be the ones that get there. And, this year they added Notre Dame, and that ended up being the biggest flop ever. But, if you expand it to 6 or maybe 8, you have that likelihood of a Cincinnati or perhaps a Coastal Carolina or Liberty sneaking in, or maybe a play-in game. Maybe you have that Liberty who wins that G5 game, gets a play-in game against the big boys. But I think college football is facing a little bit of situation with its viewership and the need to create more underdog stories.
A little sprinkle of March Madness in there wouldn't hurt, because I think that's what makes the basketball tournament special, is there's an upset possibility. And when the little guy's not invited to the party, as it is now at the CF college football playoff, I can't even get the letters right. That takes it away from that. Let's move on to quarter number 3. Call this kind of the state of the state. Now, Utah, Austin, come out.
Yeah, there was who was it? Brent McMurphy had his way too early top 25 and put Utah all the way up at 11 going into 2021, which is coincidentally where BYU finished in the AP poll this year. I guess, Steve, you're the Utah man. Do you think the Utes are worthy of, that kind of high ranking?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think, right now the big question mark is probably the quarterback position. But as we've seen, I think they've got the big recruit coming in. If you look back on any potential player that could have left for the NFL, they didn't have anyone declare. I mean, Devin Lloyd announced today that he's coming back. You have Britton Covey coming back on offense. The system's in place. Defensively, I think the stars are aligned. I think Utah's poised next year to have a really good season. I mean, this year was probably one of those, and I think the coaches knew it. It was kind of throw this one out the window because it doesn't matter. Let's get these guys experience and get them some playing time. And Utah was able to mature quite a bit those last few games. Now, of course, the devastation with Jordan at running back they've got to replace that. It looks like they did so with that Oklahoma transfer that's announced his coming to Utah. But I think what we've seen is, Utah's taken that next step in rebuilding year in, year out, regardless of losing guys to the NFL. I mean, last year they were rebuilding after losing, their entire defensive backfield to the NFL. And I thought the defense was pretty remarkable given all the people they had to replace. BYU, on the other hand, they're losing a lot. I think this is probably the most talented BYU team they've had probably in the last 10 years. Certainly, if you look at NFL recruits on that or NFL prospects on that team, you've got more on that team than any other team that I can remember from BYU. So I think BYU is going to have a little bit harder time rebuilding.
John, what are your thoughts?
Utah, I can definitely see them in the top 25 in the season ahead. I mean, the defense returns virtually everyone. And they really turned it on towards the end of the season. You saw that secondary really take steps forward. Clark Phillips, and especially, is really turning into a shutdown corner. Devin Lloyd's fantastic leader at linebacker. I think the defense is in good hands there. Offensively, you look at Utah, and I think the potential, even without Ty Jordan, I think the potential is there for them to be really good on offense next year. I like what Brewer brings to the table as a quarterback, 3-year starter at Baylor, threw for almost 10,000 yards in his career. He has the tools to be successful from day one. And Pledger is a promising running back out of Oklahoma. I think he can push Bernard for the starting job from day one. And they're going to have a nice running back combo with those two and Parks coming in. And And of course, the receiver, you got Britton Covey, you got Brant Keithy, you got all your playmakers back there. So I think Utah has the potential, and I think it isn't unrealistic to project them as a top 25 squad going into 2021. BYU is going to face a rebuilding year. It's hard to replace a quarterback as skilled as Zach Wilson.
Right. And before we move on, Steve, you're a little bit outspoken. You have a horse in the race with Utah State. What's going on up there? Do you think they're going to get this thing settled and get back on track?
You'd hope, just because of what, Matt Wells and Gary Anderson were able to accomplish there. You'd hope that they don't take a huge step back. I worry that they've hired a head coach that does not know the area, does not know the ins and outs, doesn't know the culture up there. It's different. It's different. I had a head coach up there who didn't know the culture, and he tried to mix in leftover California kids and Texas kids and Nevada kids, and it didn't work. So you've got to get the in-state kids. You have to get the in-state kids, the Polynesian recruits, and you got to sprinkle in, those California and Texas kids. But if you don't center your recruiting class around Utah and the Polynesian connection, it's going to be tough for them to continue to succeed.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's particularly good insight, considering the remarks that the university president allegedly made going into this hiring process. What did you have any reaction to that during that?
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, alleged remarks is probably the key word there. I don't know to the gist of all that she was talking about, but it was enough for the players to take a stand against it, and you saw kind of a mass exodus from a lot of those players to transfer. If that was said, it's disheartening. It's certainly not one that you want to reflect at Utah State. You're in Logan, Utah. If you have bias against one of a certain faith or culture that happens to be, the Polynesian culture, then you're not going to have a very successful program up there. And they are going to rely on Utah recruits that happen to be Mormon, happen to be Polynesian. So having a coach that kind of emulates that is extremely important. Now, I know this new coaching staff can hire one that meets those qualifications, but that's certainly going to be a black eye moving forward if those remarks do kind of rear their head in the future.
All right, let's continue our fourth quarter. We went a little extra on the third, but the fourth, just the NFL draft is approaching. Zach Wilson obviously is expected to be the first local guy taken. How soon in the draft do you think he'll go, John? You think is he a top 5 guy?
At this point in time, it's very possible. He is definitely a consensus top 15 pick in multiple mock drafts. And there's been talk of like the 49ers trying to trade up and so they can get him early. He's been rumored to go to the Jets as their pick. And there's definitely a sense that Zach Wilson is going to be one of the first quarterbacks taken in the draft. And
yeah, keep going, John.
And it's easy to see why. Just his skill set seems to translate well to the next level. His decision making, his accuracy. That's what teams look for in an NFL quarterback. And I think wherever he goes, he's going to have a chance to really succeed and really pay off as the draft pick.
Even if he looks like he's 12 years old, right?
Yeah. Steve, if you're Zach Wilson, where would you rather go? Would you rather be the second overall pick to the Jets, or would you rather fall and go to a better situation like San Francisco?
Well, I think you'd rather fall, although that drop in money certainly has some value in that, no pun intended. But you want to go to a situation where you're going to succeed, and let's be honest, Jets quarterbacks don't really succeed. I don't know when the last time we've had a successful Jets quarterback. Zach Wilson's a guy. I think he'll be the second quarterback taken. I think he'll go ahead of Justin Fields. I think he'll be he's that good. He's that polished. The quick release, the offense that he ran, he has the pizzazz. He has that kind of swagger. Everyone questions, did he face talent? Well, you know what? I heard the same argument with Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming. Look what Josh Allen has done this year and totally silenced his his naysayers. But I think, to discredit Zach Wilson and what he's done and what he's accomplished based on competition I think that's a really bad argument. We've seen quarterbacks succeed, go back to look at Tony Romo. I mean, the guy had an excellent career coming out of, a lesser program. So I think Zach Wilson's going to be poised to have a really good NFL career, and it's a matter of going to the right program and situation.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I would rather fall if I was him too. So yeah, that's the end of regulation. That was our 4 quarters there. We're going to go into overtime now. We're going to take some parting shots. So just anything you guys want to say. Let's start with you, John.
Well, I touched on how the Jazz are doing in my Great Salt Takes column for you guys a little while ago, and I like where they're progressing now. We saw some issues with them defensively at the start of this road trip. Their last couple of games, they've held opponents under 90 points. They've seemed like that they're starting to figure it out defensively. And granted, the competition hasn't been the best. The Pistons and Cavs are both lottery teams. But good teams find a way to not only beat bad teams, but dominate bad teams. And that's what they're starting to do. And I think we're going to start seeing them make a push and insert themselves into that playoff picture in the West.
Steve, what do you got?
Oh man, let's go. Let's take the road down in kind of the unforeseen path. Let's talk high school recruiting. High school recruiting here in locally. Just to give you a perspective, in 2001 when I was a senior, there were 5 Division I athletes that signed scholarships.
Isn't that amazing?
Here we are. It'll be 20 years now since I was coming out of high school, coming up, this next season. And now you have 5 on a certain team. I think the level of football.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've got 5 coming out of Timpview. I think 5 signed last year out of Timpview alone.
Right.
But it's remarkable just how much it's evolved here, the recruiting in state. I think football, if you look per capita here in Utah, aside from California, they are signing the most per capita. And when you factor in all the Western United States. So it's pretty amazing. Great football being played here starts with even the Little League programs, but the great coaching staffs that you see in high school. And you got, teams like Corner Canyon, who are making a run nationally and showing who they are, representing the state of Utah. But it's fun to watch. I love the purity of high school football. It's fun to see these guys go on and make careers for themselves.
Shit. My parting shot is I'm going to go extend on Steve a little bit and just encourage people to remember during the pandemic that there's some charitable foundations that are still in need of assistance and your support, and one of them is the HazeTough Foundation, and Steve's generous enough, we're going to have a link off of our website to make donations and such, and we're going to have more on that. But I would just encourage people in this spirit of giving to remember the folks that need it. They do some really wonderful things for families of children with pediatric cancer. And so I just want to push the HazeTough Foundation and just remind people that it's still there during the pandemic. I mean, nothing's changed, and except the ability you have to interact with the families in person, and that's put a crimp in the style, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, I mean, I think what you get when you donate to the HazeTough Foundation, it's not easy. You don't donate to us, nothing. We have no overhead expenses. This is my wife and I just volunteering, and all the money goes to these families. But you're absolutely right. I mean, during this pandemic, you've got families that are separated, moms and dads who have to, be separated from their loved one because of COVID. So you've got one parent that can only be in there. And the unfortunate part is, a lot of these children are passing away with only one parent there. And, it's childhood cancer is it's underfunded, and it's very common. It's more common than you think. I'm hearing of we get at least 3 to 4 a day of new diagnoses that we hear of. And so there's a huge need for it. And these families need it. You know, we just heard of a family today who has adopted 21 kids. Well, the mom's a teacher, and they had their 6-year-old just diagnosed with leukemia. She's a teacher. 21 kids. You often hear it too. These families have the most amazing stories. I share with them. I share the stories throughout social media. But you know, cancer targets. You know, is targets everyone, every demographic. You know, so there's a lot of families in need that could use the financial assistance and the emotional assistance.
Appreciate it. Us, bring us home.
Yeah, I just want to defer my time to Steve again. I just had a question for you. If you don't mind, if you are comfortable sharing with us, I'd love to hear it. We're big Disney people here, the two of us.
We're goofy.
The Facer family.
I love it.
And I really love that picture of Haze on your website playing with Mickey at Disneyland. I just wonder, what was that day like?
Yeah. Oh man. To say that was probably one of the top 2 days of my life. So when we took this trip, we didn't know, we were assuming he was in remission. We didn't know that 3 weeks later it would return and eventually he'd be on hospice and pass away. So we were just soaking in this moment in Disneyland, and he loved. I mean, when we sat in the hospital room and he'd be sick, he loved when Mickey would come on, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and so we thought, let's book this trip. And we saw Mickey, and we brought Haze and his brothers and sister over to see Mickey. And, Mickey kind of did the thing, like he does with everyone. And then we kind of told Mickey, hey, this is Haze. He's got brain cancer. And Mickey stopped everything, knelt down, put him on his lap. And my son just looking up at him, staring up at Mickey. It was, to talk about, Walt Disney, where dreams come true. I mean, it really is. It's just magic. It's magical kingdom for a reason. And, our families, my wife never was Disney. She actually never went to Disneyland before that moment, but she's sold. We love it too, because they do such great things for these kids. And it really, it's one of those places, I think, in the world that for that amount of time that you're there, you put away all your worries and your stresses. It's really weird how that happens like that. But for that time when we were at Disney with Haze, he didn't have cancer. It just felt like we were there celebrating life and just living in the moment.
Awesome. Guys, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. You're good friends and good sports conversationalists. Thank you very much.
Glad to be on. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks again, guys.
Just a reminder, we are on all streaming platforms. Check out our website. And we're going to put links to HazeTough Foundation and John's books on our site as well. So thanks again, guys.
Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.